Imagine it's the year 200. You are standing in the suffocating, absolute darkness of a Chinese imperial storehouse. The air is thick with the sharp smell of rotted hemp rags, old fishing nets, and mulberry bark left to fester in stone vats of lime water. A man stands over a massive wooden tub, his forearms stained gray from slurry. He dips a bamboo screen into the mush, lifts it with a steady hand and shakes it. Water drains away through the weave, leaving behind a wet gray sludge. He peels the thin sheet off, presses it against a sun-baked brick wall, and leaves it to dry. To anyone watching, he is just playing in dirt. But what he has actually done is capture the human mind. He has given human thought a permanent skeleton. Within a generation, this damp gray sheet will tear down empires, rewrite religions, and dictate the price of every human life on Earth. I'm Samuel of Radiant Reason, and this is the surprising story of paper. Before this moment, remembering things was a physical nightmare. For most of human history, if you wanted to preserve a thought, you had to fight against the physical weight of the planet. Think about that for a second. If you were a scribe in ancient Babylon, your words lived on heavy, wet slabs of river clay. You carried a stylus made of reeds, pressed it into the mud, and baked it in the sun. If you made a typo, your mistake was literally set in stone. If you wanted to send a letter across town, your mail carrier needed a backpack and a very strong spine. The Egyptians looked for a lighter workaround. They went down to the banks of the Nile, hacked down towering stalks of papyrus river reeds, and sliced them into thin ribbons. They pounded them with wooden mallets, overlaid them like a messy grid, and squeezed out the sticky, sugary sap until it glued itself together. It worked. But papyrus had a fatal flaw. It hated moisture. A damp winter could turn an entire royal library into a moldy black soup. So the Romans and the Greeks turned to something else, something far more intimate: animals. To make a book, you had to take the skin of a newborn calf, a sheep, or a goat. You soaked the hide in a caustic bath of lime water to strip away the hair. You scraped off the remaining fat with a curved blade, stretched the wet skin over a wooden frame until its fibers almost snapped, and scraped it again. The result was vellum. It was beautiful, smooth, and incredibly durable. But it came with a staggering human and ecological cost. To print a single copy of a holy book or a royal decree, you didn't just need a scribe, you needed an entire slaughterhouse. A single comprehensive text required the slaughter of over 200 animals. For millennia, knowledge wasn't just expensive, it was stained with blood. Then came the year 105, and a frustrated imperial court official named Kai Lun. Kai Lun worked for the Han Dynasty, and his job was a bureaucratic disaster. Every report, every tax record, and every royal order came written on thick slats of heavy bamboo tied together with leather strings. A single standard state report required a small cart just to move it from one office to another. Kai Lun was drowning in wood. He needed a miracle. He didn't find it in a laboratory. He found it by watching a wasp build a nest. He noticed the insect chewing up wood, mixing it with its saliva, and spitting out a thin, waterproof, paper-like wall. Kai Lun went to work. He gathered raw materials that society considered absolute garbage: old, tattered hemp rags, rotten fishing nets, the tough, stringy bark of mulberry trees. He threw them into a massive iron pot and boiled them until they broke down into a soft, fibrous mush. He beat the mush with heavy wooden clubs until it turned into a milky, uniform slurry. Wait, there's more. The true magic of paper isn't the wood itself, it's chemistry on a microscopic level. When you boil and beat plant matter like this, you strip away everything except cellulose fibers. When these fibers are suspended in water and then drained on a screen, they don't just lay next to each other, they lock arms. They form millions of microscopic hydrogen bonds. As the water evaporates, those bonds tighten, pulling the fibers into a completely flat, incredibly strong web. Kai Lun had done the impossible. He had turned useless refuse into a uniform surface that was light, cheap, and smooth. The emperor was ecstatic. Kai Lun was showered with wealth and given a noble title. But court politics in ancient China were brutal. Years later, caught up in a vicious palace power struggle, Kai Lun knew his execution was imminent. Rather than face disgrace, the man who gave the world its greatest tool of creation put on his finest silk robes, mixed a cup of poison, and quietly drank it. He died in the shadows, but his recipe escaped. If you've made it this far, you're clearly the kind of person who finds this stuff fascinating. Most people look at the world and just see objects. You see the deep, invisible currents of human struggle underneath them. You're exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. Hit subscribe. But here is the part history quietly buried. Paper wasn't just a tool for scholars. For centuries, the recipe for paper was a state secret, guarded as closely as a modern nuclear code. If you leaked it outside of China, you didn't just lose your job, you lost your head. In the year 751, the secret blew up. On the banks of the Talas River, in modern-day Kyrgyzstan, the expanding armies of the Chinese Tang dynasty clashed with the Islamic Abbasid Caliphate. The battle was a bloody rout. Among the thousands of Chinese soldiers captured that day were two men who knew exactly how to mix Kai Lun's slurry. They traded the secret for their lives. The Abbasids brought the prisoners to Samarkand, and within decades, paper mills were popping up across Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus. But this rapid expansion brought a dark, toxic reality. To keep up with the massive demand for books, early paper mills needed mountains of rags. They used old clothes, linen wraps, and domestic waste. To whiten the paper, workers had to soak these filthy rags in massive vats of human urine and fermented sour milk. The stench was so overwhelming that law codes in medieval Islamic cities legally forced paper mills to be built far outside the city walls, alongside tanners and slaughterhouses. When paper finally crawled into Europe in the 13th century, it triggered a massive systemic explosion. Before paper, a monastery might produce 3 books a year. By the time Johannes Gutenberg paired paper with his movable printing press in the 1450s, a single workshop could produce thousands of pages a day. But the system was constantly starved for raw material. By the 1800s, the world had completely run out of rags. The demand for daily newspapers and industrial record-keeping was consuming every piece of discarded clothing on the planet. Paper manufacturers became desperate. During the American Civil War, paper mills actually imported thousands of tons of linen wraps stripped directly off ancient Egyptian mummies dug up from the desert. People were reading the morning news printed on the burial clothes of pharaohs. It was an unsustainable madness. The system needed a permanent supply chain. In 1844, a German weaver named Friedrich Gottlieb Keller invented a machine that could grind logs of wood into a fine pulp, completely eliminating the need for rags. Suddenly, the vast forests of North America and Europe were converted into a global supply system. Paper shifted from a precious commodity into an industrial tidal wave. Think about that for a second. It is in your pocket right now as a crumpled receipt. It sits on your porch as a cardboard shipping box. It is the coffee cup sleeve keeping your fingers from burning. It is the passport that defines your nationality, and the piece of fiat currency that tells you what your labor is worth. We tear it, we stain it, and we throw it into the trash without a single thought. But it is the thin membrane holding our entire civilization together. Every law that governs your life, life, every lease you have ever signed, every medical diagnosis, and every shred of history we possess exists because a 2,000-year-old recipe allowed us to trap human thought onto a piece of dried tree mush. It is the ultimate invisible system. Take a look around. History is everywhere.